For the longest time, I was convinced one of the best indie game developer teams is the Canadian Klei, but just recently I learned actually one of the best indie game developer teams is the Vancouver-based Klei. It rhymes with play. This knowledge also leaves us with a gaping question of why, but let us leave this dilemma for another time. There's a pretty good chance you're also familiar with their work. Either they're super recognizable, comic book art style operating with high contrast and no blend, or they're widely loved IPs such as Shank, Don't Starve, Oxygen Not Included, or my personal favorite stealther, Mark of the Ninja, is quite likely to ring a bell to most. The team's latest release, hoping to become greatest, is none other than Griftlands, a game that entered development in 2015 with high hopes of becoming the studio's flagship RPG title that would redefine the genre by giving a never-before-seen level of freedom to the player. Sadly, this bite turned out to be too big to chew, and a few years in the making already, roughly a year after the first announcement, the dev team had to admit this project isn't coming to light. However, from the ashes would rise the game we have access to today. According to Klei, the people loved the world and loved the premise of negotiation and manipulation. In short, we focused our design, and over the last year, we've been working on something new in the same world. There was also an Epic Games Store exclusive alpha, which the community applauded wholeheartedly, and that pretty much sums up how the idea of creating a revolutionary RPG ended up seeing daylight as a roguelike deck builder. Being a deck builder, Griftlands' core gameplay loop will revolve around taking a predefined, basic stack of cards and through adding and/or removing cards, creating a well-oiled machine, a deck of your dreams that particularly plays itself during duels. Furthermore, like many of us, Klei also supports the who wants to just have fun when they could have double the fun attitude, so they were kind enough to create a game where just building one deck isn't enough for you to fare well, you'll actually have to build two of them. You can deliver on this ask playing one of the 3 core game modes. Starting out, you have a campaign/story mode and a daily quest. Daily quests are a series of battles or events with set rules, modifiers and starting decks available for every player to compete against one another. Your performance is rewarded by points, and there's a ladder to climb in order to prove yourself as the best Card-Slinger of them all. As the name entails, this would reset and change on a daily basis, providing some welcome variety. Just keep in mind, even with all these variables, you'll eventually come across some repetition. Nonetheless, this is a great way to keep the more experienced player base interested in returning. As a newcomer, I'd probably recommend you rather head into the creatively named Play Griftlands menu option, where you'll be presented the option to start a new run with Sal Ikderik, the bounty hunter. Later on, you'll have 2 other playable characters to pick from and Brawl mode, but for now, either you go with normal, which isn't exactly marked clearly but it's the top one, or story difficulty, and after skipping the customization part, seeing that you have nothing available yet, you'll get to enjoy the story mode. On a macro scale, all 3 campaigns are split into a handful of days which you can view as chapters. These days are then further divided into a sequence of quests, where NPCs offer 2 tasks to pick from, usually corresponding to whether you want to duel with your battle deck or your negotiation deck. You then make your way over to the point of interest, partake in the interaction, and more often than not, following a duel, head back to drop the quest, get rewarded, and pick up another one. Between these handful of events each day, while traversing the map, you'll occasionally run into random events that can range from duels you can't avoid to side quests you pick up, and it is this time frame when you can visit vendors to strengthen your decks or replenish your lost resources. Each day would also contain at least one mission related to the overarching story, and after nightfall, a boss battle awaits if you've managed to survive that long. Once you successfully complete story mode, you'll unlock brawl mode for that character, which essentially boils down to the story experience without any of the fluff. You'll still go through a gauntlet of a few days, each with 4 to 5 battles, and ending in a boss battle. But there's no story in between them, there's no roaming around on the map, thus no random intermezzo pop-ups, and vendors you'll only be able to visit at specific times as well. As for the duels themselves, while battle and negotiation seem very different at first sight, in reality, they are mostly the same concept. You and your opponent both have a pool of health or resolve, and the aim is to reduce your opponents to 0 through playing cards from your hand. These cards will typically promote dealing direct or sustained damage, increasing your defense, or buffing/debuffing, but you'll also come across familiar card game terms such as discard, burn, or combo. Duels labeled battle often involve having allies around by either your or your opponent's side. These characters will be controlled by the AI and go through their own moveset as they see fit, without you being able to affect it. You will, however, always have a visual indication of what will happen once you pass turn, so you can always plan your moves accordingly. In a similar manner, negotiation duels will also involve more participants than just yourself, but in this case, these additions are arguments. Arguments also do their own thing without you being able to control them, and just like enemy henchmen, you can target the opponent's individual arguments usually, but unlike allies in battles, arguments in negotiations have way less health and tend to come and go constantly during a duel. There are two core differences, however, between the two duel types. One, negotiations usually serve as a foreplay to your battles. Depending on how well this foreplay goes, you will either have an easier time during battle, or, resembling everyone's first sexual experience ever, the main event might even be skipped completely. Mind you, occasionally you'll have a negotiation duel that has nothing to do with battles, just happens standalone, but even in those cases, there's a consequence to losing. Difference number 2 is how losing a negotiation isn't remotely as harsh as losing a battle, as latter results in your death and therefore the end of your run, while losing negotiations just gets you in sticky situations from my experience. It usually doesn't seem to end your runs. Finally, we must touch on progression as one of the key elements of roguelike titles. If you're a fan of it, fret not, Griftlands has metric fucktons of progression woven into it both within and between runs. Case in point number 1, the entire concept of starting with a poopy deck and building a beast is progression galore. But, in case that wasn't enough for you, everything you do will be accounted for in some form or another. Your runs earn you experience, which in turn unlocks both cosmetics and a bigger card pool for that specific character. Fights and events can also reward you with metal, which is a currency you can spend on passive strength increase that persists through runs to make your life easier. Similarly, accomplishing so-called grifts will award another currency that you can spend on talents before starting a run to tweak your playstyle somewhat. You can also collect prestige points via defeating bosses on higher and higher difficulties, and then spend this currency on unlocking flourishes that are these ultimate moves of the characters which you have to charge up before use. And if even that wasn't enough, for you completionists out there, there's an entire codex to be filled by coming across characters and items. Oh, and of course, harmonized Steam and in-game achievements if that's something you care about, and I've gotta say, Griftlands is one of those rare games that fails to ejaculate achievements all over your body for such impressive things as launching the game or clicking the play button in the menu. During my 40 hours of play, without specifically hunting any achievement, I've managed to pop a single one so far. As for visuals, admittedly, there's not an awful lot to deliver on. Most of the time, you'll be looking at two 2D figures sitting on a layer in front of a background layer. Occasionally, this number increases, but point is, most of the animation in this game is either the repeating movement of the characters or minimalistic effects attached to them or the UI. Don't expect having to ask your spouse to find your dropped jaw due to blockbuster Hollywood movie scenes. What is there, however, is not only presented in a super sweet cartoony style, but it is delivered with quality. The little animations give the objects so much life, you'd almost be willing to forget how little action there really is going on. Important elements of the UI are usually well placed and easy to read. If they need to overlap a character or an animation, they aren't afraid to do so. Possibly the only exception to this is your little objective tracker in the mid/top right, as more often than not it's hard to read the small white text on the busy background. A simple 50% opacity backdrop would be an easy solution, and I would imagine this will be delivered at some point. One minor annoyance I came across was how during intro and outro cutscenes, as the narrator tells you about the story itself, instead of some animated short or such, there are just these single pictures one at a time that would constantly move with added parallax effects, which even I didn't necessarily find enjoyable. I don't even want to try and imagine what people with sensory disorders such as motion sickness, for example, would feel just looking at them. Something way more annoying, however, is how after the end of day summary, the screen dips to black. At first, I was convinced this had to be a graphical glitch of some sort, but soon I noticed how it's not actually my screen dipping to black, rather just the game, as indicated by the cursor being unaffected. I understand the idea, but I found this incredibly annoying. Sounds won't rock your world, but they certainly serve their purpose. Music is certainly enjoyable and provides great support to whatever it is backing. 40 hours in, not a single crash, no stuttering, not a single instance of longer than average load time. Obviously, there's something to be said regarding the few that knew about Griftlands when it was supposed to be an RPG, and how, for them, the release of a deck builder, I imagine, can be the same experience as how I was promised an amazingly immersive RPG experience playing Cyberpunk 2077, but instead was delivered a flaming paper bag of dogshit on my doorstep, but not being a part of that crowd, I wouldn't want to speak in their stead. We're now heading deep into spoiler territory, so if you want to keep the game unspoiled, I suggest you skip to the verdict section. You will easily navigate there using the link among the timestamps in the description below. Given the roguelike nature of Griftlands, let's get the obvious disclaimer out of the way. In 40 hours of game time, I have not seen every single dialogue, interaction, or available nook and cranny of the stories. With that being said, I'll speak for and about what I have experienced. Take it with a pinch of salt. There are 3 main story arcs in Griftlands. In a nutshell, Sal, the bounty hunter, returns seeking revenge on those who have wronged her and must make a choice between 2 allies to achieve this. Rook, the retired veteran, now works as a freelancer and gets caught between a rock and a hard place during his latest job. Last but not least, Smith was the shame of his family while all his siblings had successful careers, which unsurprisingly led to him being cast out of his inheritance and seeking revenge on the others. If there's anything these storylines do well, it's harmonizing with the given character's gameplay. Sal has the most basic or classic, if you will, story, just like her gameplay. There's nothing wrong with either. In fact, hers is probably the most well-rounded story, with the expected, obvious endings you can imagine. Rook's gameplay revolves around luck, flipping coins, or constantly loading up then emptying his revolver, and in a similar manner, his story is also about flipping sides, doing whatever is necessary to keep you going. Furthermore, just as how, despite flipping the coin between its two halves, you like to think you're in charge of Rook's fate like some ominous god of chance, turns out neither of the two parties he's playing matter either, as there's a third party holding the strings in the background. I really enjoyed the cloak and dagger aspect of this story, right until the very end, where the massive letdown of not getting to know the third party happens, and that sort of ruined it for me. Smith, both gameplay and story-wise, is the comic relief character of the trio. His playstyle is about getting wasted and brawling with empty bottles, and his story and interactions reflect this in a glorious, tongue-in-cheek manner. Expect to shit your pants while going for a ride with him. My complaint here, however, would be similar to that regarding Rook's campaign, as Smith's story also seems to be chopped off way too early. Going through the days, building up a party of followers, most certainly didn't lead me to think, out of nowhere, I'll have to fight my eldest brother alone and cut, roll and scream. On the exact opposite spectrum, however, is the world building that went into this title. Having RPG roots, this is to be expected, but even so, the amount of in-universe terms and concepts presented to the player is so much, swear to God after 40 hours, there are still things I need to look up every now and then, so that I can just try and interpret what the flying mackerel the conversation is going on about. Absolutely not even remotely anything to think about here. The price of Griftlands is roughly that of 2 movie tickets, whether you're in Germany, the US or Aussie, and with 40 hours behind me, I'm not even remotely done with picking Griftlands bones clean. There's not a single gripe I have that could not be sorted. Admittedly, assuming they'll do something about campaign stories ending abruptly is a stretch, but come on, you're likely not here for the story anyway, and whatever is there is already solid. In case you were waiting for an in-depth comparison with Slay the Spire, I'm sorry to disappoint, not gonna compare a fresh release to a title that's rocking 2 years worth of content, but at the very least, I'll hint that I think there's no reason Grift couldn't surpass. Unless you're attempting a speedrun, you have no reason to rush through duels. Instead, if you can mitigate the incoming damage, it's worth taking your time to play a few extra cards and get some experience on them. Watch out with pets and party members. While they can prove to be valuable sources of additional damage or useful meat shields, they can just as easily decide to murder people you would probably otherwise want to keep alive to avoid receiving social banes. Drinking in bars to recharge your resolve has the obvious downside of filling up your deck with dead draws until you either play them or go to sleep at the end of the day. Don't forget though, drinking also allows you to get on the good side of the local patriot. Unless you're specifically saving up for something, it's a worthwhile investment to drink around with everyone available, to reach liked status, and get a glance at what social boon they have to offer. Just don't forget to time this right before you end your day, so you instantly sleep off all the bad cards. And just like that, we finally reached the end of this review, and the time is here to say our loving goodbyes. We hope you found what you came looking for. If you did, we'd be very grateful if you pleased the machine gods by liking our video. If you'd like to come along for our next deep dive, don't hesitate to subscribe. If you have any game you'd like for us to check out, let us know in the comments section. Please keep your arms within the escape pod, as we can't take responsibility for any accidents, and we'll see you again soon.